The autumn wind whispered through the cemetery's ancient oaks, scattering golden leaves across the gathering of black-clad mourners. Elena Bennett stood motionless before her husband's mahogany casket, her elegant black dress rippling in the breeze. At 45, her face still held the grace that had captured Richard's heart 2 decades ago, though now it was etched with grief that seemed to age her by years. Richard was not just a titan of industry the priest's voice carried across the assembled crowd, but a beloved husband, father, and pillar of our community. Elena's fingers tightened around the single white rose she held, her wedding ring catching the late morning light. Behind her, the children Michael and Sophie stood close, their young shoulders bearing the weight of their father's unexpected passing. At 18, Michael was the spitting image of his father, while 15-year-old Sophie had inherited Elena's delicate features and her father's determined chin. The crowd of mourners stretched back into the distance, business associates, friends, and employees of Bennett Enterprises, all come to pay their respects to the man who had built a real estate empire from nothing. Richard's journey from a small-time property developer to the owner of one of the city's most successful development companies was legendary in business circles. The Bennett name adorned some of the most prestigious buildings in the skyline, each a testament to his vision and determination. Elena's gaze drifted across the familiar faces, seeking comfort in their shared grief, when something caught her eye. At the edge of the gathering, partially obscured by an ancient oak, stood a woman she didn't recognize. Tall and striking, the stranger couldn't have been more than 32, her raven hair cascading over a designer black dress that seemed more suited to a cocktail party than a funeral. Their eyes met briefly, and Elena felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. As the priest began the final prayers, the mysterious woman began moving forward through the crowd. There was something purposeful in her stride, something that made Elena's heart race. The stranger's Louboutin heels clicked against the cemetery path with a rhythm that seemed to count down to something inevitable. "Let us commit Richard Bennett to his eternal rest," the priest intoned solemnly. The woman in black reached the front row just as Elena stepped forward to place her rose on the casket. In that moment, the stranger's voice cut through the sacred silence like a knife. "I object to these proceedings." The words hung in the air like smoke, and every head turned. Elena froze, the white rose trembling in her grasp, as the stranger reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick envelope marked with her husband's law firm's letterhead. "My name is Victoria Chase," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent cemetery. "And I'm afraid this funeral cannot proceed until certain legal matters are addressed." The gathering erupted into shocked whispers as James Morton, the Bennett family's lawyer of 15 years, hurried forward. His usually composed demeanor wavered as he approached Victoria Chase, whose red-lipped smile remained unwavering. "But mess," Chase James said quietly. "This is hardly the appropriate time or place." "On the contrary," Victoria interrupted, her manicured fingers tapping the envelope. "This is exactly the right time. Before anyone buries Richard Bennett, they should know the truth about who he really was." Elena's mind reeled as fragments of memories cascaded through her consciousness. Last Christmas, Richard working late. The mysterious calls he'd step away to take. The business trips that seemed to stretch longer than necessary. Each memory now took on a sinister new hue, like photographs developing in reverse, revealing darker truths beneath familiar scenes. Mum Sophie's trembling voice brought Elena back to the present. She squeezed her daughter's hand, forcing strength into her voice she didn't feel. "James, please handle this," Elena managed, turning to guide her children away from the spectacle. But Victoria's next words stopped her cold. "Perhaps Mrs. Bennett would like to hear about the weekend house in Lake Tahoe, the one Richard and I shared for the past 3 years." The world tilted sideways. Elena's mind flew back to her and Richard's beginning that chance meeting at a charity gala 22 years ago. She'd been working as an art curator, and he was just starting to make his mark in real estate. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of late-night conversations about dreams and aspirations, stolen kisses in construction sites of his early projects, and shared visions of the future they'd build together. "Richard loved watching the sunset from our deck," Victoria continued, her words dripping with cruel precision. "He always said it was his favorite place to think, to be himself. Away from obligations." Elena's knees weakened as the memory of Richard's proposal flooded back on their own deck at their first home, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I want to watch every sunset with you," he'd said, down on one knee, his eyes shining with promise and love. James Morton's steady hand appeared at Elena's elbow, guiding her toward a nearby bench. "Mrs. Bennett, please, let's move this conversation somewhere private. MS Chase, I must insist." "What I must insist upon," Victoria cut in, opening the envelope, "is the immediate recognition of Richard's final wishes. This will was signed 3 months ago, superseding all previous versions." The document she produced bore the official letterhead of Morton Associates, but James's face drained of color as he scanned its contents. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "I personally handled Richard's last will revisions 6 months ago." Elena watched as if from outside herself as James read through the papers, his frown deepening with each page. The gathered mourners had formed a loose circle around them, their shocked murmurs creating a susurration like dead leaves in the wind. "According to this," Victoria announced to the crowd, "Richard intended to divorce Elena and marry me. He changed his will to reflect his true wishes, leaving controlling interest in Bennett Enterprises to me, along with the main estate and half of his personal assets." A high-pitched ringing filled Elena's ears as the ground seemed to sway beneath her feet. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, countless shared dreams, all of it called into question by this stranger with her cruel smile and impossible claims. "That's a lie," Michael's voice cracked with fury as he stepped forward, but James held up a restraining hand. "I'll need to verify the authenticity of this document," James said firmly. "Nothing changes today. Richard Bennett's current legal will, as filed with my office, stands until proven otherwise." Victoria's smile never wavered as she tucked the papers back into her envelope. "Verify all you want, James. Richard and I knew this day would come. We planned for it. Everything is in order, I assure you." She turned to Elena, adding with mock sympathy, "I truly am sorry you had to find out this way. Richard always spoke of how he hated to hurt you, but love makes choices for us sometimes, doesn't it?" As Victoria turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the cemetery path, like a metronome counting down the seconds of Elena's collapsing world, Elena finally found her voice. It emerged as a whisper, directed at no one and everyone. "Who are you, Richard? Who were you really?" 2 days after the funeral that never concluded, Elena sat in James Morton's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Victoria Chase presented her evidence with the precision of a prosecutor. "I joined Bennett Enterprises as Richard's executive assistant in 2020, Victoria began, sliding a personnel file across James's mahogany desk. "Though I suspect you wouldn't remember me, Elena. I was careful to be unremarkable during our brief encounters." Elena's throat tightened as she recalled the handful of times she'd visited Richard's office for lunch dates that he'd increasingly cancelled. The quiet, efficient assistant who'd politely redirected her had that been Victoria. The memory felt tainted now, poisoned by hindsight. "Our relationship began during the Sacramento project," Victoria continued, producing a stack of photos. "Richard was under tremendous pressure. He needed someone who understood the demands of his position, someone who could support his vision without competing priorities." The photographs spilled across the desk like falling autumn leaves. Richard and Victoria at a private dinner in San Francisco, walking hand in hand on a beach, at sunset sharing an intimate moment on a balcony overlooking Lake Tahoe. Each image was time-stamped, methodically documented like evidence in a crime scene. The Lake Tahoe property was his first gift, Victoria said, producing property documents, purchased through a shell corporation to maintain discretion. Then came the apartment in the city, the art collection, the private accounts. She laid out bank statements, transfer records and receipts, building a paper trail of betrayal. James examined each document with growing concern. "These appear to be authenticated transactions, but they don't necessarily prove." "Perhaps the emails will be more convincing," Victoria interrupted, retrieving her tablet. "Richard was quite expressive in his private communications." Elena's hand shot up, stopping Victoria before she could begin reading. "That's enough," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I don't need to hear his words to another woman." "Oh, but you do," Victoria insisted, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Because Richard wrote extensively about his plans for our future, about how trapped he felt in his marriage, how he'd finally found true passion with me. The timestamps on these emails correlate perfectly with the changes in his will. James cleared his throat, uncomfortable but professional. MS. Chase, while these materials are compelling, they don't explain the irregularities in the will's filing. The document you presented wasn't processed through proper channels. Victoria's smile turned razor-sharp, because Richard knew certain parties might try to interfere. He took precautions to ensure his true wishes would be honored. She produced another document, this one bearing the seal of a prominent law firm across town. I've retained separate counsel. We'll be filing a formal challenge to the current will this afternoon. Elena finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Why did you wait until the funeral? Why make a spectacle of it? Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something hard and calculating beneath. Richard always said transparency was the foundation of good business. I wanted everyone to hear the truth at once, no rumors, no whispers. Just facts. Facts. Elena's laugh held no humor. Facts are Richard never filed for divorce. Facts are he spent Christmas with his family, not you. Facts are Victoria cut in. That love doesn't always follow legal documents. Richard's heart had chosen its path. The paperwork was merely catching up to reality. James gathered the scattered evidence into neat piles. We'll need time to verify everything. In the meantime, nothing changes with the estate or company operations. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt. Take all the time you need, but remember, every email, every photo, every transaction tells the same story. Richard Bennett had built a whole life beyond his marriage. It's time for everyone to accept that reality. As Victoria's heels clicked away down the hallway, Elena stared at the evidence of her husband's double life spread across the desk. Each document was another crack in the foundation of her marriage, another shadow cast across 20 years of memories. James, she said quietly, find me the best forensic accountant in the city. Something about this isn't right. I can feel it. Sarah Chen's office was nothing like the film noir detective agencies Elena had imagined. Instead of smoky shadows and Venetian blinds, she found herself in a sleek downtown high-rise, facing a sharp-eyed woman whose reputation for uncovering corporate conspiracies had made her the most sought-after private investigator in the city. Victoria Chase, Sarah mused, scanning through databases on her dual monitors. Born Rachel Victoria Cheswick. Interesting, her fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up records that painted a very different picture from the polished executive assistant they'd come to know. 3 names changes in 10 years. Multiple addresses. Short stints at various companies, always in executive support roles, always leaving just before Sarah paused, eyes narrowing, just before financial irregularities were discovered. Elena leaned forward. What kind of irregularities? Nothing that could ever be proven conclusively. She's clever. But there's a pattern. She gets close to powerful men, gains access to accounts and documents, and then Sarah gestured at the screen. Things go missing. Usually small enough amounts to be written off as accounting errors, but they add up. The revelations sent Elena's mind spinning back through the past 3 years. How many times had Richard mentioned small discrepancies in the company's books? How many times had he brushed it off as software glitches or clerical errors? There's more. Sarah continued, pulling up another file. 2 months before Richard's death, someone accessed the company's document management system using his credentials. Late at night, from an IP address traced to a coffee shop downtown. That's not unusual, Elena said. Richard often worked late, but except Sarah's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a hunter closing in on prey. According to his cell phone records, Richard was at home those nights. All of them. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Martha Stevens, Richard's secretary of 15 years, the one Victoria had replaced, reached out through James Morton. Elena met her at a quiet cafe across town, away from the corporate headquarters, where Victoria now ruled like a queen in waiting. I should have said something sooner, Martha began, her hands trembling around her coffee cup, but I was afraid and ashamed. Richard asked me to stay quiet about what I saw. What did you see? Martha. Victoria, she was obsessed with him from the start. Would stay late, arranged to be alone with him. Richard was uncomfortable, but she was good at her job, really good. Then I started noticing things. Small things at first. Martha described how Victoria would volunteer to handle sensitive documents, how she seemed to always know about confidential deals before they were announced. The day Richard confronted her about some missing files, I overheard them arguing. She threatened him, said she had evidence that could ruin him, ruin the company. What kind of evidence? I don't know exactly. But after that, Richard changed. He started drinking at the office, something he'd never done before. He looked haunted. The pieces began falling into place when Sarah's forensic analysis of the disputed will came back. The signature's good, she explained, spreading out magnified images. Too good. It's identical to Richard's signature from a contract dated 3 months earlier. Pixel by pixel identical. It's copied, Elena breathed, digitally lifted and reprinted. Professionally done, but if you know what to look for, Sarah pointed to microscopic irregularities in the paper fiber. The document's a forgery. A damn good one, but definitely fake. But it was the discovery about Richard's last days that broke the case wide open. Sarah traced his movements in the week before his death, finding security camera footage from the Lake Tahoe property Victoria claimed they shared. Look at this, Sarah said, playing the video. It showed Richard arriving alone, pacing the deck in obvious distress. Hours later, Victoria arrived. The argument that followed was silent on the security footage, but their body language told the story. Richard gesturing angrily, Victoria advancing on him, something clutched in her hand papers, perhaps the forged will. The timestamp, Elena noted. This was the day before before his suspicious single-car accident on the mountain road, Sarah finished grimly. The accident that happened after his brake lines showed signs of tampering. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Are you saying? I'm saying we have enough to take to the district attorney. Financial fraud, document forgery, and questions about Richard's death that need answering. As Elena left Sarah's office that evening, clutching a file of evidence that would soon shatter Victoria's carefully constructed scheme, she remembered something Richard had told her years ago. The truth is like gravity, Elena. You can fight it for a while, but eventually, everything falls into place. She looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to emerge. I'll make this right, Richard, she whispered. I promise. Behind her, the city lights began to twinkle on, one by one, like truth emerging from darkness. Michael Bennett stood at his father's desk in the home office, running his fingers along the smooth mahogany surface where Richard had spent countless evenings working. Family photos lined the walls, graduations, birthdays, vacations, each one now carrying the weight of uncertainty. I don't care what the evidence shows, he said to Elena, his voice cracking with emotion. Dad wasn't a cheater. He wasn't a liar. Sophie sat curled in their father's leather chair, scrolling through her phone with trembling hands. It's everywhere, Mum, she whispered. TMZ, Business Insider, even my friends are sharing it. The headline glared from her screen: Bennett Empire Scandal, Love, Lies and a Contested Will. The media frenzy had exploded after Victoria's legal challenge became public. Reporters camped outside their gate, long lens cameras capturing every family member's coming and going. Social media buzzed with speculation, old photos, and increasingly wild theories about Richard's death. Uncle David called. Sophie continued, her voice small. He said we should accept Victoria's settlement offer. That fighting it will just drag our name through the mud more. Elena felt her jaw tighten. Richard's younger brother had always resented his success, and now he was actively advocating for Victoria's version of events. The family was fracturing along fault lines that had existed for years, hidden beneath the surface of holiday dinners and forced politeness. Your Uncle David doesn't know everything, Elena replied, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. And he certainly doesn't know your father's heart. But the truth was, Elena had begun to question everything she thought she knew. Each night she'd lie awake, re-examining 2 decades of memories. Had Richard really been working late all those nights? Were those business trips necessary? The weight of doubt crushed her chest, making it hard to breathe. The children were suffering in their own ways. Michael had withdrawn from his college applications, his dreams of following his father into the business now tainted. Sophie, once vivacious and social, had become quiet and defensive, getting into arguments with friends who shared gossip about her family. I punched Trevor today, Michael admitted one evening over an untouched dinner. He was showing everyone pictures of Victoria, saying Dad had good taste. His knuckles were bruised, his eyes defiant. Elena reached across the table, taking her son's hand. Violence isn't the answer, but I understand. We're all angry, we're all hurt. Sophie looked up from her plate. I hate her, she said simply. I hate her for making me doubt Dad, for making everything ugly." The declaration hung in the air, heavy with shared pain. Elena pulled her children close, feeling their shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. They were too young for this burden, too young to have their memories of their father questioned by strangers and loved ones alike. Later that night, Elena found Michael in the garage, sitting in Richard's classic Mustang, the car they'd been restoring together. "He promised to teach me to drive stick," Michael said, gripping the wheel. "He promised we'd finish it together." Sophie had taken to sleeping with Richard's old Harvard sweatshirt, the one he'd wear on Sunday mornings making pancakes. "It still smells like him," she'd whispered to Elena one night, "like his cologne and coffee." These moments of grief, pure and untainted by scandal, were what kept Elena going. These were the truths she clung to, not the salacious headlines or the whispered rumors, but the real Richard Bennett, the father who never missed a dance recital, who taught his son to change oil, who read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. Mum, Sophie asked one evening, as they sorted through old photo albums, "What if we never know the whole truth?" Elena pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with Richard's cologne from the sweatshirt. "We know the truth that matters, sweetheart. We know he loved us. Everything else we'll face together." Sarah Chen's late-night call jolted Elena awake. "You need to see this now," the investigator's voice crackled with urgency. "I've connected Victoria to Marcus Delacroix." Elena's breath caught. Marcus Delacroix was notorious in corporate circles, a shadow figure known for making problems disappear for the right price. Within an hour, she was in Sarah's office, staring at surveillance photos spread across the desk. "These were taken 3 weeks before Richard's death," Sarah explained, pointing to images of Victoria meeting a man in a darkened parking garage. "Delacroix is known for 2 specialties: document forgery and making accidents happen." The surveillance photos showed an exchange in envelope for a thick manila package. "We tracked the money," Sarah continued, pulling up bank records. "Victoria made 6 withdrawals of exactly $9,999 each, just under the reporting threshold. Classic structuring technique." But it was the next revelation that made Elena's hands shake. Sarah had managed to recover deleted emails from Richard's private server, including messages from the week before his death. "Elena, my love." The first email began, "Never sent but saved in drafts. If you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. Victoria Chase isn't who she claims to be. I discovered discrepancies in our accounts, millions missing, redirected through shell companies. When I confronted her, she threatened to destroy everything we've built. She has connections I never imagined. I thought I could handle this quietly, protect our family from scandal, but..." The email ended there, unsent and unfinished. Meanwhile, Victoria was growing increasingly erratic. Security cameras caught her trying to access Richard's home office at 3 a.m., claiming she'd forgotten important documents. When denied entry, she'd thrown what guards described as a hysterical fit. "She's looking for something specific," Sarah mused. "Something she's terrified we'll find first." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Michael, unable to sleep, had started spending nights in his father's garage, tinkering with the Mustang they'd never finished. "Dad always said the car was teaching me more than mechanics," he told Elena one morning. "He said sometimes you have to take things apart to understand how they work." Those words triggered a memory. Elena rushed to Richard's office, to the antique mechanical desk clock he'd been fixing for years. It had been their private joke, the brilliant developer who couldn't repair a simple timepiece. "He never was trying to fix it," Elena whispered, carefully opening the clock's housing. Inside, nestled among the gears, was a small USB drive. Sarah's team found 3 files on the drive. The first was a video recording of Richard himself, dated 2 days before his death. "Elena." His familiar face filled the screen, tired but determined. "I'm recording this because Victoria Chase has given me an ultimatum. She's embezzled millions through a sophisticated scheme, one that would implicate me if exposed. She wants me to divorce you, marry her, give her control of the company. She has forged documents, manufactured evidence of an affair that never happened. I've been gathering proof of her crimes, but she's discovered what I'm doing. If anything happens to me..." The second file contained detailed financial records showing how Victoria had systematically siphoned money through a network of fake vendors and shell companies. The third was a recorded conversation between Victoria and Marcus Delacroix, discussing the forged will and, more chillingly, the need for an unfortunate accident on the mountain road. Elena's hands trembled as she called James Morton. "We've got her," she said quietly. But Victoria had one last card to play. That evening, Elena returned home to find her front door slightly ajar. Inside, drawers were pulled open, papers scattered. Victoria stood in Richard's office, wielding a letter opener like a weapon. "It was supposed to be mine," she hissed, her composed facade cracking. "He promised me everything would be mine." "Richard never promised you anything," Elena replied calmly, as police officers silently entered behind her. "You invented a relationship that never existed, created evidence of love that was never real." "You don't understand." Victoria's voice rose hysterically. "I deserved this. I worked for it. I planned everything perfectly." "That's right." Sarah Chen stepped forward, recorder in hand. "You just admitted you planned everything, including Richard's death." But Victoria's face went chalk white as she realized what she'd done. The letter opener clattered to the floor as officers moved in. "The truth really does come out," Elena said softly, picking up a family photo Victoria had knocked over. "It just needs someone strong enough to wait for it." The courthouse buzzed with tension as Elena took her seat in the packed courtroom. Victoria sat at the defendant's table, still elegant in a navy suit, but her usual confidence had cracked like old varnish, revealing the desperation beneath. District Attorney Sandra Martinez approached the bench, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Your Honor, the state calls Marcus Delacroix to the stand." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Victoria's head snapped up, her face draining of color as her former conspirator was led in, shackled and wearing prison orange. "Mr. Delacroix," Martinez began, "please tell the court about your meeting with MS. Chase on September 15th of last year." Delacroix glanced at Victoria, then back to the DA. She wanted two things: a foolproof will and a guaranteed accident. Said it had to look natural, nothing that would trigger an investigation. Victoria's attorney jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. This testimony was obtained through a plea deal, which has been properly documented," Martinez countered. "The witness's credibility can be cross-examined." Overruled, Judge Harrison declared. "Continue, Mr. Delacroix." MS. Chase provided Mr. Bennett's original signature samples and paid half upfront $50,000 in cash. Delacroix's matter-of-fact tone made the details even more chilling. "She was very specific about the brake lines, said it had to happen on the mountain road, where accidents weren't uncommon." Victoria suddenly stood, her composure shattering. "He's lying. This is all lies." MS. Chase. Judge Harrison warned, "Control yourself or you'll be removed." But the real bombshell came when Martinez played the audio from Richard's USB drive. Richard's voice filled the courtroom, detailing Victoria's embezzlement and threats. Elena watched her children grasp hands as their father's last testimony echoed through the chamber. Victoria's facade finally crumbled completely. He was going to ruin everything, she screamed, tears streaking her perfect makeup. "I worked too hard, planned too carefully. He was going to expose me, destroy everything I'd built." MS. Chase, her attorney, hissed, but it was too late. "You think you're so perfect, Elena Bennett, with your perfect family and your perfect life." Victoria's voice rose hysterically. "I deserved it all. I deserved everything he had." Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. "Remove the defendant." As officers moved to restrain Victoria, she locked eyes with Elena. "He didn't deserve you," Elena said quietly. "And you never deserved him." The judge's ruling was decisive. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds the defendant guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and first-degree murder. Victoria Chase, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The gallery erupted in murmurs as Victoria was led away, her carefully constructed world finally shattered. Elena felt Michael and Sophie's arms around her, their family circle unbroken. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, "All claims against the Bennett estate are dismissed. The original will stands." He looked directly at Elena. "Mrs. Bennett, while this court cannot restore what you've lost, we can ensure that justice is served. Your husband's legacy, both personal and professional, remains intact." As they left the courthouse, reporters clamoring for statements, Elena held her children close. The truth had finally emerged, like the sun after a long storm. Richard's voice echoed in her memory, "The truth is like gravity, Elena. Everything falls into place." Justice had been served, but more importantly, Richard's name had been cleared. His final message to his family wasn't one of betrayal, but of love and protection, even at the cost of his own life. 1 year after the trial, Elena stood in Richard's home office, now transformed into a shared family space. Michael's architectural drawings for his first design project, a memorial park dedicated to his father, covered one wall. Sophie's college acceptance letters were proudly displayed on another. The antique clock, its secret long revealed, still kept perfect time. Mum, Sophie called from the doorway, "Uncle David's here." The reconciliation with Richard's brother had been gradual. After Victoria's conviction, David had come to them with profound remorse, carrying decades of unspoken regrets. Richard always saw the best in people, he'd said, even when we didn't deserve it. Now, family dinners were healing occasions rather than tense obligations. The empty chair at the head of the table no longer felt like an accusation, but a warm reminder of the man who had brought them all together. Michael had found his calling in the family business, but on his own terms. He'd launched a charitable foundation in Richard's name, focusing on ethics in corporate leadership. Dad always said success without integrity was just failure in expensive clothes. He would tell the young executives who attended his seminars. Elena watched from her office as Victoria's story concluded in the newspapers. The woman who had tried to steal her life was serving her sentence, her elaborate scheme dismantled piece by piece. The missing millions had been recovered, restored to the company's accounts and its rightful shareholders. But the greatest victory wasn't in the courts or the ledgers, it was in the quiet moments of healing. Like finding Richard's old videos of family vacations, or Sophie discovering his handwritten notes in her childhood books. Each memory was a testament to a love that couldn't be forged or stolen. Elena finally finished the book she'd been writing, not about scandal or betrayal, but about resilience and truth. The foundations of love, she wrote in the dedication, are built with trust, strengthened by time, and proven in storms. On what would have been their 25th anniversary, Elena visited Richard's grave alone. The headstone, simple and elegant, bore the words they'd chosen together years ago: "Beloved husband, father, builder of dreams." "You were right, my love," she whispered, placing a white rose beside his name. The truth does fall into place, and love, real love, leaves fingerprints that can't be forged. As she walked back to her car, Elena saw her reflection in the window, older now, wiser, but still standing tall. Richard's final gift hadn't been the estate or the company, it had been the strength he knew they had all along. Back home, Michael and Sophie were waiting with takeout and old family photos, ready for their weekly ritual of sharing memories and making new ones. Elena looked at her children, Richard's legacy in flesh and blood, and knew that while some chapters end, the story of love continues. Some truths, after all, are written not in wills or contracts, but in the hearts of those we leave behind.